Sorry, sir. This ticket is no longer valid. The attendant said it without looking directly into his eyes, her voice gentle but cold. He went still. His hand, faintly trembling, clenched the old flight cap, its color faded with time. On the cap, an insignia engraved with the code DS117, worn down to the point of almost never having existed. No one paid attention. No one noticed the way he stood silent, as if trying to hold on to a fragment of honor falling away, piece by piece. For 30 years he had never spoken of what happened in the desert. But today, there was something in the wind that kept him from remaining silent. His name was Thomas Rivera, 80 years old. Dark tan skin, hollow cheeks, a gait that leaned slightly to the right, as if something inside him no longer worked the way it once did. He lived in an old mobile home on the outskirts of Milton, where each morning you could hear the train passing, and the wind curling through the pines behind the house. The little house, its white paint yellowing, had a corrugated metal roof speckled with rust. In the window, a small faded American flag hung at an angle, its cord tied with fishing line. He lived alone. No wife or children, no close relatives. Occasionally, the paper boy would stop his bike in the yard, or the neighbor lady would bring over some leftover bread. But most of the time, Thomas lived in silence. Not because he liked quiet, but because he had grown used to it. Like the way a soldier grows used to the sound of helicopters, the hiss of wind through a radio headset. Then one day, when there is nothing left, that silence becomes the final trench. That morning, like every day, he rose at 5:30, made coffee with his left hand, a habit trained since the injury to his right. That hand had once worked the yoke in a C-130 cockpit, but now trembled so much it could barely hold a cup. He no longer complained about it, because he had never reported the injury to the VA, partly because it had not been recorded in an official mission, partly because he knew no one would believe what he had done. Some things, if told, only invite more doubt. This morning was different. On the table lay the old flight cap, grayish blue, the stitching unraveled along one side. On its crown, a small metal insignia engraved with the code, DS117. He had kept it in a wooden box for many years, taking it out only to polish it each November. But today he wore it. Not because of the weather, but because he was about to step into a nameless region of memory, a place with no map, no road back. He took 2 buses to get to Pensacola, a local route, then a longer line running along Highway 90. The whole trip took nearly 2 hours. He carried a small bag containing an old water bottle, a packet of crackers, and a copy of the paper ticket he had received from a veterans organization years before, a lifetime admission pass to military exhibitions. On the bus, he sat alone in the last row, eyes looking outside. The sky that day was strangely clear. Not a single wisp of cloud. The air felt suspended. The stretches of roadside grass slid by in silence, like memories, sometimes appearing for a moment, then dissolving without a trace. He was not going to see airplanes, not going for an event. What he wanted to see was the sky above Pensacola, the place over which, that year, he had once flown on a journey with no name, no medals, no glory. But there were 5 lives. There were whispers before the cockpit closed. There was the engine's roar like a pounding heart. And a choice, without orders, without authorization. Only right and wrong. The cap he wore today was the last remaining fragment of DS-117, a mission erased from every system for reasons of national security. No records, no proof, only scars, and silence. He did not hope anyone would recognize him, did not need thanks. But inside, one question kept circling back. If no one remembers, did it all ever truly happen?
Welcome to Veteran Best Stories, where the war ends, but the stories live on. From the foxholes to front porches, we honor the silent battles our veterans still fight. Subscribe and walk with us beyond the battlefield.
He had never spoken of that night, not out of fear, but because no one asked. 3 weeks after Operation Desert Storm began, he was on a night transport mission when that signal appeared. Brief, encoded, buried inside static, like a whisper from a place no one should ever hear. A secondary frequency, reserved for situations that were not supposed to exist. Those who had ever run missions with him knew well, no one was allowed to remember. But he did not forget. Codename DS-117. Merely a string of symbols. No records, no map, no way back. A SEAL team had been sent to destroy an underground fuel depot north of Basra, but was ambushed. They transmitted the signal in desperation. Command assessed the situation as acceptable loss. No rescue, no plan B. No one answered, except him. He did not argue, did not call the base, did not wait for confirmation. He simply turned the yoke, trimmed for crosswind, and began flying back. It was not an act of bravery. He did not think of it that way. It was the only choice he could live with. Not survive with, but live with. No one knows how he managed to land there. No runway, no beacons, no time to contemplate approach angle or safe clearance. Only a pinprick on his mental map, an estimate built from scraps of memory and habits learned over hundreds of previous flights. 4 figures emerged from the dark, 3 bearing wounds, 1 nearly motionless. They spoke no words. No one needed to ask who was who. They just climbed aboard, leaned against the fuselage, letting the engine noise drown everything else. The last man collapsed right beside the hatch. Blood soaked his shirt. Sand clung to his hair. His eyes still open, but seeing nothing. Tom bent down, took the man's wrist, felt a faint pulse. The soldier rasped something, voice raw, broken, as though surrendering the final portion of his soul. "Tell my kid, his dad didn't die for nothing." Only 5 words, yet they carried more weight than any report he had ever read. They followed him back to base, followed him into every dream afterward. Followed him through the retirement years when each morning he rose, made coffee with his left hand, and his right would twitch as if it still heard that line echoing nearby. When he landed, no one waited. No commander stood by to question him. No debrief. No entry in a flight log. Only an internal notice weeks later. A unit has completed a special training evolution. No further inquiry required. Since then, no one mentioned DS-117 again. Even when he tried to speak of it, they did not believe him. "You're probably confused," a VA officer once said when he referred to the mission in his medical file. No unit with that code ever existed. He did not argue. He did not need credit. But he still kept the cap. And the small, faded metal insignia engraved with DS-117, as proof of the things others forgot. But he could not. Each time he looked at it, he remembered the young soldier from that night, remembered the wide eyes, the clenched hand. And the last sentence, like a message sent beyond the war, across the silent years, to remind him that there are things that cannot be buried. There are missions that do not need to exist on paper. They need only to exist in one person's memory. And today, standing before the exhibition gate, he put that cap on again, not to be acknowledged by anyone, but only to see whether anyone else still held the memory. Wait a moment. I have a small favor to ask you. Please hit like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you love inspirational stories, and don't forget to leave a comment telling me where are you watching from and what time is it where you are. I always find it wonderful to see the whole world gather together just to share a meaningful moment. Tom stood still at the edge of the line of people waiting for security screening. He did not push forward, did not ask again. He simply kept his distance as if afraid he might disturb something operating very smoothly. The security rope stretched across like an invisible boundary between the present and what he had once belonged to. An old world, an old loyalty, an old wound that had never had the chance to heal. The young security staffer looked at him one last time, then sighed and turned her back. "Please, don't cause trouble." Her voice was soft but hard, as though speaking to an old child who refused to understand the rules. Tom did not reply. He was not angry, not sad. He simply, quietly, tightened his grip on the brim of his cap, his lightly trembling fingers touching the silvered metal emblem already beginning to corrode. For a long moment, he lifted his face, looking at the sky over the grass field where aircraft were being readied for the performance. The sky that day was so clear it seemed unreal. In the distance, the Blue Angels pilots were walking along the runway toward their planes. Bright blue uniforms, footsteps steady like a clock. Among them, a younger one, slender in build, suddenly hesitated mid-stride. He was no longer looking ahead. His eyes angled to the right, toward the crowd moving quietly in its lines. That gaze stopped where Tom was standing. It was only an old cap. But from that distance he still saw the code engraved in silver. DS-1 very faint, almost erased. But he knew he was not mistaken. That sequence of characters was not something he happened to read. It was something he had once memorized. Lieutenant Jace Granger, pilot number 4 in the demonstration formation, son of SEAL Commander Adrian Granger, who had left this life more than 20 years earlier, carrying with him a dying request that had never left his son's mind. If you ever meet someone named Rivera, look straight into his eyes. Then say, "Thank you for me." Jace had never thought that name was real. It was part of the fragmentary stories his father used to tell when night fell, when the pain of chemotherapy woke him after midnight. A pilot with no record. A man who flew into darkness to bring them back. Codename DS-117. Withdrawn from every document, yet alive in a page of an old leather notebook Jace had kept in a drawer throughout his flight school years. And now he saw it. On a faded cap, worn by an old man standing still amid the crowd. Jace did not keep walking. His steps faltered, then he pivoted toward the operations room. No need to report. No need to ask permission. Something in that man's gaze made him know, if he let this pass, he would never forgive himself. Meanwhile, Tom remained where he was, unaware of the eyes fixed on him from a distance. He was used to being overlooked, to silence, to glances that slid past and never lingered long enough to remember a face. But today, the sky felt different, not because of the blue, but because of the sense that someone was truly seeing. Not looking to judge, but to recognize. Jace strode quickly into the command area, leaving the engine noise and loudspeaker announcements behind him. His heart was pounding fast, not from mission tension, but from the sense that he had just touched a vein of memory his whole life had been nourished by. A memory not even his own. In his breast pocket, his phone vibrated lightly. He pulled it out, without much thought, and dialed a number he had called only twice in the past 3 years. The voice on the other end came through, low and cutting, yet retaining a constant attentiveness. Colonel Thorne, the Airshow commanding officer, and also someone who had been present in more operations than any file could ever record. Jace drew a deep breath. No time to circle around. He went straight to the thing that was twisting inside him. There was no immediate skepticism, only a strange silence on the other end. As though the colonel were moving back through memory, scanning the names that had slid through reports. The numbers crossed out. The events sealed top secret, and then vanished in the electronic corridors of the Pentagon. DS-117, huh? The question was not verification. It was the whisper of someone who had witnessed, had known, but had also been instructed to forget. Jace nodded, knowing the person on the line could not see. He continued, slower now, almost hushed, about the leather notebook his father had kept, where the final pages recorded thanks to an unnamed pilot. About the hospital nights, when the man who had once been a SEAL commander whispered through the haze of chemo, "If you meet him, let him know I lived long enough to be grateful." Thorne still said nothing, but this time not from doubt. He was calculating. A plan. A possibility. Something without precedent, but something that had never required permission either. He did not ask whether Jace was sure. He did not need proof, because he knew that in certain cases, some things do not need to be verified, only to be done right. 2 minutes later, the call was relayed through 3 units. A technical chief, a security coordinator, a program scheduler. None of them objected. There was something in Thorne's tone that made them understand. This was not a routine request. Meanwhile, outside the gate, Tom still stood. His hand had grown tired, his shoulders beginning to sag as the sea wind brought an unexpected midday chill. But he did not turn away, did not step back. Maybe because he knew that if he left now, there would never be another chance. Inside, a new plan was being drafted on a disposable napkin. The demonstration sequence would adjust one segment. 3 pilots would create a split formation, leaving a gap in the sky large enough to form a number. A group of SEALs who had been invited as honored guests were now informed they had one final task. One would carry an artifact. Another would stand ready at the grandstand, waiting for a signal. All of it organized in just 11 minutes. No paperwork, no approval chain, no chime. Just a sequence of quiet, precise actions. The way the military sometimes conducts its most important matters, in silence. And at the center of that silence was an old man, still standing alone at the fence line, unaware that a door was about to open, not by authority, but by memory. Dear audience, take a short break or grab a glass of water, then keep listening. The developments ahead that are even more surprising. Comment number 1. If you think the story is good, so we know you are still here. 15 minutes after the last call, with no alarm siren, no loudspeaker naming anyone, only a young officer in a white uniform appeared at the main gate. He walked straight, without hesitation, eyes finding the aged face amid dozens of people, standing intermingled. Reaching him, he paused a beat, as if to confirm something, and then inclined his head slightly, just enough for someone who had lived a lifetime in the military to recognize the meaning of the gesture. "Mr. Rivera, please come with me." No explanation, no compulsion. Yet in the officer's stride there was a quiet reverence that could not be acted. And in the old man's eyes, a very small glint, as though the layer of dust that had long covered memory had begun to loosen. Tom did not ask. He simply followed. One step, then another, each step seeming to pull along an entire span of years that had been quietly buried. The crowd outside still did not understand what was happening. A few people turned their heads watching the old man's back as he was escorted past the barrier. A few phones lifted, but no one spoke. No one pushed in, as though all of them sensed the specialness without anyone needing to say it aloud. 5 minutes later, the loudspeaker sounded. The familiar voice of the program coordinator, but today carrying a different timbre, slower, deeper, with something like a choke in it. "We announce the demonstration will pause briefly to make time for an unexpected honor. Ladies and gentlemen, direct your eyes to the sky." People looked up. A light breeze blew. A very strange pocket of stillness in an event normally full of noise. Then the roar came. Not the sound system, the real sound, of 4 FA-18s knifing through the air from the south. They flew in a cross formation, then split, each leaving a white plume, trailing like handwritten strokes across the deep blue backdrop. A slow pivot, then a bank. The 4 jets formed the figure 117. On the ground, the silence stretched. Some recognized it immediately, some whispered to ask. But whether they understood yet or not, every gaze converged on one point, the spot where the old man stood. His eyes narrowed upward, his right hand lightly gripping the brim of his cap. At the same time, from the side of the stage, 6 men in Navy SEAL uniforms stepped forward. Black uniforms, no medals, no weapons. Only the eldest among them carried a small wooden box. He did not look at the crowd. He looked only at Tom. Standing before him, he said nothing. He opened the box slowly. Inside was a small silver metal insignia, an exact replica of the emblem that had once rested on his cap. And beside it, a small folded slip of paper, yellowed with time. Tom bent to look. His eyes stopped on the line. "It is time for honor to find its way home." No one spoke. No one needed to. In that moment, the entire airfield, with its thousands of people, the engine noise, the distant wave sound from the bay, seemed frozen in a strange state, the stillness of gratitude. A little girl in the front row gripped her father's hand, whispering a question. The father did not answer. He only bowed his head. Then many others bowed as well, not because of an order, but because they themselves understood. There are people, missions, sacrifices that had to wait until now to be called by their true name. Tom did not cry. He only tightened his hold on the cap, as if keeping himself from dissolving in the swell of emotion. His eyes remained fixed on the sky, where the numbers were quietly thinning into the wind. But inside him, something had landed after 30 years of waiting. And under the Pensacola sun that day, honor thought to be lost found its way back home. The next morning, the video began to spread. At first it was a short clip, filmed on the phone of a teenage girl in the second row, capturing the moment the jets traced the number 117 across the sky, then stopping on the figure of the old man bowing before the wooden box. In barely an hour, the video had been shared thousands of times. The earliest captions were still confused. Who is he? Why did the Blue Angels halt the whole formation just to honor one person? Then small stories began to surface. An account from Colorado, claiming to be a former Marine, recounted being wounded near Basra in 1991 and being saved by an unidentified flight. A nurse once stationed at Al-Kharj wrote that she had seen a pilot land without prior notice on a night of blinding sand, then disappear as if he had never existed. Those scattered fragments, when pieced together, began to shape the outline of a person, and of an act no record had preserved. Within 24 hours, the hashtag #TomThePilot topped the veterans category on X. Local TV stations shifted their focus. Veterans organizations called. Someone from Washington sent an invitation of honor. Someone proposed a late bestowal of the Medal of Honor. Someone else simply wanted to send a handwritten letter. Thank you for not leaving us behind. But Tom did not reply immediately. He returned to his little house in Milton, still rose early, still made coffee with his left hand, still sat on the porch with his gaze toward the distant pines. The story could go viral, but he did not change. Then one day, representatives from the National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola knocked on his door. They did not come to persuade, only to ask whether he would consent to display that cap. Just the cap. No nameplate. No biography. Tom sat still for a very long time. Finally, he nodded. The faded flight cap, with the DS-117 insignia, was placed in a simple glass case. No showy lights, no soundtrack. Beside it lay a handwritten slip, reproduced exactly. If anyone survived that mission, let them know I still remember too. There was no line reading honored by, no laudatory biographical panel, only a memory set in its proper place, like a scar accepted, neither hidden nor shouting. Visitors came, many standing in silence. An elderly veteran wiped his eyes without speaking. A high school student wrote a handwritten letter and left it in the comment box. A young woman who had lost her father in Desert Storm sent a brief email. Thank you for keeping our memory alive. Tom did not attend the opening of the exhibit, but that day he sat in front of the old computer screen in his home, watching the video once more. He rewound the segment where the white smoke traced 117, paused on the scene of the seals approaching, looked for a long time at the hand lifting the lid of the wooden box. Then he switched off the screen, said nothing, just poured a little more coffee, let it cool, and took a small sip, as if tasting something he had not touched in a long time. A feeling of being seen, yet not being named. Honor does not need spotlights. It lives in memories that are kept, in silence that carries weight. And sometimes, the greatest legacy a person leaves is simply the acknowledgement that there are right things which need no audience, and yet cannot be forgotten. There are heroes who pass through this life without leaving an echo. No statue, no medals, no Wikipedia page, only memory, sometimes fragile as smoke, yet still living inside those who were ever touched by quiet courage. Tom's story is not only about war, it is about honor, needing no recognition, yet deserving remembrance. About memory, erasable from records, yet impossible to erase from the survivors' hearts. And about an America where each right action, however small, helps write the history of human dignity. If this story made you pause for a moment in the rush of life, leave a comment, share the name of a veteran you know, or simply a word of thanks. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video, not only for Tom, but for all those still quietly safeguarding the soul of America.